So let's tackle the question of what are Zeno's paradoxes? Many people have heard the title, but may not know what they are. Well, there's one that's not very well known, and it, if I read it to you and you understand it, you may see why it's not particularly well known. You wouldn't say it's, I think, a particularly challenging thesis. It's this. Remember that Parmenides had argued that everything was one. So there could not be a multiplicity. There was only one thing. Now, here is what we have. Socrates is in discussion with Zeno and Parmenides. This is in Plato's Parmenides dialogue. Here is what he puts into the mouth of Socrates. Whether Socrates said anything like this is unknown. He said, "How do you mean this, Zeno? If things that are many, then they must therefore be both like and unlike. But this is impossible, for unlike things cannot be like, nor can like things be unlike. Isn't that what you are saying?" Zeno replies, "Yes." Now, this paradox has not fared particularly well historically, because it seems to have a rather obvious reply, namely, things can be alike in some respect and unlike in a different respect, and therefore multiplicities or many things. And Socrates gives off the impression that he is not particularly impressed. So he says, and now he's addressing Parmenides, he says, "I understand, Parmenides, that Zeno here wants to be identified with you by his treatise as well as by his friendship, for he has written somewhat in the same style as you. But by changing it, he is trying to make us think that he is saying something else. For in your poem, you declare that the all is one, and you do a good job of proving this, while he declares that it is not many, and furnishes many impressive proofs." Well, we've only seen one. "And each speaks so as to seem not to have said any of the same things, though you are saying practically the same things. What you have said appears beyond the rest of us." Zeno says, in reply to this, "Yes, Socrates, but you have not completely understood the truth of the treatise. It is actually a defense of Parmenides' argument against those who try to make fun of it, saying that if what is one, the argument has many ridiculous consequences which contradict it. Now, my treatise opposes the advocates of plurality and pays them back the same and more, aiming to prove that their hypothesis, if there are many things, suffers still more ridiculous consequences than the hypothesis that there is one, if anyone follows it through sufficiently. I wrote it in this spirit of competitiveness when I was young, and then someone stole it, so I did not even have the chance to consider whether it should be made public." Okay, well, it hasn't really, except in Plato's dialogue here, we don't really have much of a view of it. We don't have much of an external view apart from Plato's own, so there's not much we can say about it. So we move on to the second one, which is famous, very famous, and when we speak about Zeno's paradoxes, we speak about the paradoxes of motion. So you recall that Parmenides had said not only that all things are one and therefore not a multiplicity, not a plurality, he also said that there was no change. Now, I interpreted this to mean something like, well, from the goddess's point of view, nothing changes because she is seeing things from the viewpoint of eternity, from, as it were, the world as a four-dimensional thing with time included in it. She is seeing it from the outside. Maybe that's so, maybe not, who knows? Well, the second of Zeno's paradoxes aims to add more fuel to this idea that there is no change. So Zeno has given paradoxes, and you have to say they're rather brilliant paradoxes and were deservedly stunning at the time for this conclusion. Not to say that the Greeks did not have responses to them, but that the thesis itself was really quite startling. So here then is the idea of Zeno's paradox. And I'll just give you one, which is Achilles and the tortoise. So Achilles and the tortoise are involved in a race. Achilles starts off at the 100-meter mark. The tortoise is given a head start. He starts off at the 50-meter mark. Now, the paradox is this. They both go at the same time. Achilles takes some time to reach the 50-meter mark, which is where the tortoise started from. But in that time, finite amount of time, the tortoise has now advanced a certain amount beyond that. In order for Achilles to then reach the point where the tortoise now is, then the tortoise has a chance to go a little bit further. By the time that Achilles takes to go to that distance, then the tortoise has gone a little bit further. And the argument is that the Achilles can never overtake the tortoise. So Achilles can't win the race. Now that is a startling conclusion, and it certainly did survive. It certainly is responded to by two philosophers who came later, much later. First of all, Aristotle in the Physics, and partly also in the Metaphysics. These are two works of Aristotle. The Physics came first, the Metaphysics came after that. So you have these two works, both of them discuss Zeno's second paradox and aim to refute it, aim to show that there is a fault in the premises of the argument. Motion is obvious. We can all see that motion exists. Races are one. One racer can overtake another racer. Therefore, there must be something wrong with Zeno's paradox or Zeno's premises in this argument. Therefore, Zeno is mistaken. That's a plausible argument. It's given by Aristotle, given also by Simplicius later. Both of these philosophers aim to show that Zeno's paradoxes were illicit, that they relied upon faulty premises. Now, the discussion about this is by no means settled. It went on into the 19th, 20th century, probably still going on. But the general consensus in the 19th century was that when we came up with a good theory of the infinite, infinitesimals, where calculus made genuine sense for the first time in the work of Cauchy, then there was a genuine solution to these paradoxes that resolved them. Didn't stop there. There was further discussion by Bertrand Russell, discussion also by the mathematician Hermann Weyl. Many people contributed to the further discussion, but I think the general point is accepted, that the Zeno paradox of motion is not a paradox after all. Instead, it's resolvable. Now, Zeno, in some sense, was more successful than Parmenides in his arguments. Parmenides leaves us with something that seems very paradoxical, as I've suggested. Zeno is certainly also paradoxical, but the arguments are more sophisticated. You might say that they're more mathematical in their content. So once you have both of them more or less grappled with, understood, then the question becomes, what content do they have? And I think both Zeno and Parmenides had the same impact on subsequent philosophers. They had argued for something which looks deeply implausible, but had given brilliant arguments for it, arguments that were not easily set aside, and had to always to be reckoned with, but that they hadn't won the day. Okay, so what I'll try to do next time is to look at the philosophers that were simultaneous with Parmenides and slightly earlier, namely the Pythagoreans, because the Pythagoreans had the longest reach of any philosophers. They truly did dominate the philosophy of antiquity through 1,000 years easily. And how they did so was principally through their influence on Plato. So next time I'll start on showing how the Pythagorean argument went, how it evolved over time, and what significance it has. Because in my view, its significance is of the greatest import for understanding all of metaphysics. And with that, I leave you until next time, my friends, and I'll see you then.